Hi, thank you all for coming out this afternoon. Thanks for having me. Shall I start? I'm an artist. I was born in Trinidad. I always wanted to be an artist, but what direction that took, I never really knew. And growing up in Trinidad, I was exposed very much to Carnival. The contemporary Carnival of Trinidad has always been and still remains very much a platform for people to speak out. It is still very much a way for people to express themselves. And I always wanted to go to art school, but because of economic means, that never happened. So Carnival, or I should say the mass camp, which is where Carnival productions happen, became the art school. And is, in many ways, it is an art school for a lot of young people who want to learn about art. So when you go to the mass camp, it's about if you want to learn basically by trial and error. So if you want to learn to make a shoe, you do it by trial and error in the camp. You want to learn to sculpt, you do it in the camp. So it's a lot of learning the hard way, lots of burns, cuts, and bruises. So mass is, it's very public, it's participatory, it's multidisciplinary. Mass is also kind of used to describe a circumstance within the context of Trinidad. It's very much become a verb. It's part of the Trinidad vernacular. It's very much part of our dialogue, the way we speak. And I started doing stuff like this. I started designing costumes for children's productions in the beginning, which went on for, I don't know, about 10, 15 years. I was doing this. And over the years, as the work developed, different opportunities came up to do it outside of Trinidad. So London, the US. But there was always this urge to be something more than just the carnival artist. I always found because there's such a short season, because it happens in February, there's just this build-up and then it ends. And it's like, where does the work go from there? So for me, it was about seeing where the work could live outside the context, using those aesthetics outside of that carnival space.
Is this your work?
Yes, it is. So one of the first projects where I decided to kind of step outside of my comfort zone was the Polite Force. The Polite Force was done in Johannesburg. I was there as an artist in residence. And it first started as from my own interactions with police in Trinidad, kind of responding to that, but also moving to Johannesburg at a time. It was still going through that process after apartheid. It was still a bit uneasy. And I found myself collaborating with other artists, doing this project. So we went out, we got bulletproof jackets, police caps, and we had polite embroidered on it. And we went out into the city and basically we were polite to people. So we offered to light people's cigarettes, carry people's bags, offered people drinks, which was all fine. But on the other side of that, there was also the response of people when we approached them, because they never saw polite. They always saw police. So the first reaction when they see us coming is to go the other way. We even had some instances when people did come to us. Wasn't for help, but actually to complain about we're not doing our job. Somebody's actually being robbed down the street and you're all sitting here having tea. But what it also did, it showed a lot as well how much being in a position of power plays out within society. So we found ourselves being able to access places that the general public wouldn't be able to access. And it says a lot about people don't really see, because we have not police, but we're able to get into these places. So in this image above here, it's not very clear, but one of the artists is actually in a government office behind the counter, signing and stamping forms, right? And he's not being questioned. We went in, we were opening file cabinets, people were taking out forms, reading documents inside government buildings, and there was no question at all about it. Yeah.
Did it matter, you did this in South Africa, did it matter that you were black or white, or I don't know the political in terms of the black policemen or white or black?
No, I mean, the group, I mean, it was a mixed group, you know. We were both black and white artists wearing polite, walking around, and both of us got the same kind of reactions.
But did the political atmosphere have a reaction to, I'm not sure what it's like in South Africa, so.
No, I don't think it really had any impact on it. So this is just a short video of, you know, that process of us kind of walking through the city, interacting with people. So it goes on and on and on. But what's interesting about the process as well is doing the project, our interactions with the actual police were also very funny. Because when they saw us there as well, you know, they identify with the polite, because we actually had an event where we did permission to block off the street, and we just did it on our own. And there were complaints from the neighbors that there's this event happening, and they knew nothing about it, and, you know, call the police basically to come and see what's going on. The police show up, see us in the bulletproof jackets, caps and everything, and they're like, oh, you're already here, and they turn back. You know, so that was pretty interesting. I mean, right after that, I found myself back in South Africa again, this time Cape Town, for the Cape Biennial, and I was asked to do something for the city. And what I saw myself now, like every time I do a project, it would be about responding to something about that place, something that happened both socially, historically, or otherwise. And I did this project called A Walk into the Night, which I called Invisible Procession. So you never saw the people in the procession. All you saw were these shadows moving through space. And it was a project based on the history of District 6. District 6 was a community in, what was considered the colored community in Cape Town, and how they lived. It had a lot more to do with location, social status, and their integration into an interaction with both whites and blacks during the period of apartheid. And this community was a thriving community during that period and was completely destroyed during the 1960s. And only during, actually the year of the project was the year they actually acknowledged that they were wrong in doing the project, and started honoring people who lived in those communities. So I usually work with do a series of workshops with people. Here I worked with the Carnival community there in doing all these workshops, creating all these sculptures and costumes that would be worn by the public. Sorry. Is it stuck? Okay. The thing with a lot of these projects is that they're unrehearsed. So you never know what's going to happen on the day of the procession. In this case, basically a riot broke out during the procession. And by the end of the procession, everything was destroyed. It also kind of questions the success or the failure of the project. Was it a failure that this thing happened? It's still a question in my head as well. But what it did bring up was some new dialogue around the kind of communication people had around this space in particular. It happened along Parliament Street, which is right next to the Parliament building in Cape Town. And it's a space where the colored community never really had access to. So you now have this group of people in a space that they have been kept away from for so long. Now that in that space, it's almost like they didn't know how to react within it. Even now, downtown Cape Town, people stay in the townships, people don't really come into the city centers. So it was a nice dialogue around that. This is like somebody processed into that project. Runaway reaction. This was also based on the Gwangju riots that kind of led to that democratic process in Korea. This happened in 2008, sorry. This happened for the Gwangju Biennial. And with this project, it was like the two extremes. Cape Town, where you had it, there was this big riot, and then moving to Asia, where everything is very organized, very streamlined, everybody listens. In fact, what happened on the day of the procession, I guess lost in translation. None of the participants showed up for the actual procession. And what happened was like, well, where am I gonna get? I needed 75 people. And someone just got on the phone, and 10 minutes later there's a noise, and outside there are 75 people standing waiting, waiting, to get into costume. So a lot of my projects, I work with a range of people, everything from musicians, costume designers. I love working with students. And here in Korea in particular, I work with a DJ in creating the soundtrack for the piece. Heading back to Trinidad, I grew up in one of what we consider like one of the poorer neighborhoods in Port of Spain, which is the capital in Trinidad. And it's very common to see working class women with powder, covered in powder in their necks. And they'll be always looked down on as negative, bad. They'd even be called prostitutes because they have on this powder. Where the act of putting on the powder comes from, nobody really knows. But I thought it would have been interesting to, in very much a carnivalesque fashion, to turn that idea on itself so it becomes something very critical around race, color, class within the context of Trinidad. So I started this project it's an ongoing project, it's called the Powder Box series, where I create these designs that are worn by schoolgirls. It's very common to see schoolgirls wearing this powder in it. So what I decided to do was create these pattern stencils of everything from local flowers to designer brands that they would put on their bodies, almost like a response to their position within their communities. So, but it's also about claiming a space that they normally don't have access to. The work also goes on to talk about the education system, because not all schools, or I should say all females from all schools would do this act. So you won't, so like this school on the end here, this school on the end, I went to this school. The school around the corner, which is more like an upper class school, you won't see you won't see girls in the school doing it. So there's this thing about class as well, and color, because the lighter your skin complexion is, you can't really do it because it becomes fashionable. But if your skin isn't dark enough, then you can't do it. And this project evolved into a larger series of works. I've kind of see it like almost like a storyboard playing out with different characters within them. And even extended to young men in the community as well, who are involved in, I guess, some of the gangs there, and talking about this piece in particular, appropriating the Nike swoosh, which is also like a check mark for every act of violence that's committed, or, almost like a sergeant's stripes on one, So a soldier, or this breastplate that protects one from whatever dangers there around. As part of that project, I created this installation, which is this galvanized fencing that people are asked to walk into. And there's a projection inside of it with this girl putting on the powder. But the closer you get to the projection, the narrower this alley becomes. And when you get right down inside, there's a fog machine that kind of goes off like a self-defense mechanism. That's kind of like the powder coming out at you. La Fantasy is a collaborative project with two very good friends of mine. And it first started as, one wanting to do a show, but not wanting to do it in the traditional gallery space. And then we came up with the idea of actually creating a space of our own to have this exhibition, which turned into the idea of building a house. So the work extended with many collaborators. So eventually what happened was we had a friend who had a piece of land. So he lent us the land for 3 weeks. So we built a house, or the facade of a house, complete with garden, picket fence. And what was interesting about building houses, in the process, people actually, in the community, actually thought we were moving in to the place. So during the process, the neighbors on either side helped with the project. So we got water from one neighbor and electricity from the other. So outside the structure of the house is this very beautiful, ornate facade. But on the inside of it is the complete opposite. It was kind of showing all the horrors that were occurring at the time in Trinidad. And La Fantasy is actually the name of the road where the Prime Minister had just built his new $100 million house. So it was a whole play on the front. And the house was built right across the road from his constituency office. Yeah, so it was a whole, comment on that. So it was everything from buried bodies to blood in the bathtub, body bags on the floor. But inside the house is always dark. So when you enter, you have to come in with a UV lamp. So it's almost like entering a crime scene. So when you pass the lamp, you see all these UV drawings on the wall, almost like blood stains. When I first started working in Carnival, I worked a lot with paper, cardboard in particular. One, because of how accessible it was and how cheap it was. And for a long time, it became my main medium for working. So in doing this installation in Jamaica, Symbiosis, playing around with the idea of the Caribbean and its territories, but also kind of reimagining this idea of how we see exhibitions. So all the structures you see, or the images you see in the installation, are actually hummingbirds, which have been abstracted and turned into new forms, and creating this new kind of environment that people interact with. And when people come into this space, they're encouraged to to touch the work, to move around the work. Because like the Caribbean, it's an ever-changing, ever-shifting kind of space. One of the reasons that we use cardboard as well is also, I guess, a comment on the idea of trade within different communities, and this idea of value, we put on commodity that moves between the islands. So after many years of living in Trinidad, I decided to move to Japan in 2009. And this is one of the first projects I did there. It happened, this project was done right after the tsunami and earthquake. I was commissioned by the city of Mino, where I had done a residency in 2005, to do an installation for the community there as a kind of commemoration of the victims of the earthquake and tsunami. So eventually what happened was I had collaborated with some of the artists, and some people actually came from the Tohoku region to work on this project with me. So it's called Kawanoji, and Kawanoji basically means kind of like, kawa means water. Kawa in Japanese is written with these 3 strokes, but it also represents, for people, father, child, and mother. And all these cutouts in the installation are messages from different people from that Tohoku community to their families and loved ones who they lost. Project. So the project originally was supposed to be up for a month. It stayed up for almost half a year. Right. This project, Cloud, as well as, is also an ongoing project that has been restaged several times and in different ways. It was first done at the University of Champaign, Illinois. And it has 2 manifestations. There is the performative side of it. There's also the installation side of it. The installation is usually set up in a way that people are able to interact with it almost as if it's a large-scale costume. And Cloud, again, for me, was one of those things about, I guess, personally looking at my practice and just how it moves from location to location and how it changes. This shifting, just like a cloud, will dissipate, change, shape will move, change over time. Song of the Sun. This is a procession work that was done in 2011 for the Aichi Triennale in Japan. Like many of my projects, this was my first kind of large-scale project in Japan, and not really knowing what I was getting myself into. In terms of the challenges that would be faced with the project. So living in Japan, the thing you learn to deal with, I guess, is the whole bureaucratic process of doing things. It can tend to be very slow and tedious sometimes. The Japanese, they're very efficient, but there's this whole other bureaucratic process that and culture as well, that kind of weighs things down. So a lot of the challenges with making the work, like dealing with the police and getting permission to do things, the way people moved on the street. So they look at you and it's like, they can't dance. Right? I say, but you all have festivals where people dance in the street. It's like, yeah, but it's not that festival. Or you can't make something, 5 meters high. And it's like, but you all do structures 5 meters high. It's like, well, that tradition was there before your project. So those kind of things did. But Song of the Sun as well, they wanted something as well to kind of commemorate the events of the tsunami and earthquake. So there's this whole theme around the idea of the phoenix being reborn. The other thing was, in their movements, there were police always present to make sure that they stayed in formation. So you had to be in rows of 3. You couldn't change the formation. Anytime you change the formation, you'll always see somebody kind of come back and spread them out, keep them nice and orderly. Right. Oh, that's pretty dark. Positions and power. This was done last year in Trinidad. It was my first project back home in a couple of years. And it was a bit of a challenge because being away, even though I'm in contact with my family in Trinidad, being away, I discovered how much the country has changed and how much I have, well, I guess a little bit of both, how much I have changed, how much the country has changed, but how much things stay the same at the time. So back to my play on class and power within the context of Trinidad, creating the structure that would be pushed by people below. Oh, that's really dark. So,
the lights, we can see this better. I'm having a hard time seeing it.
okay, yeah, this is a bit, is it possible to get the lights for a bit? Yeah, it's a bit. Oh, yeah. All right, that's a lot better. Yeah, so it was this whole play on both the social classes within that Trinidadian construct. It was almost like a funeral procession that happened right at the end of the carnival, while all the feathered and beaded costumes left the street. This presented itself with a very haunting kind of soundtrack to go along with it. It was very much an intervention into and kind of taking it back as well to what the carnival should, where it started and what it should be, instead of this very commercial enterprise that has now become. So the procession had 2 structures. There was there's what I call the overseer, who sits on top of the tower looking down on everyone. And then he has a guard dog that's played by this character here, who was on all 4 throughout the procession. And is moved to the streets of Port of Spain, moving very slow, slow soundtrack, very haunting, very moody, disrupting everything where it went. There are points in the procession where there will be loud music playing on the side of the street, and then it will just stop because people are trying to figure out what is this thing that's happening. This was done last year at the Tate Modern. It's called No Black in Union Jack. And it was, the Tate for many years wanted to do a carnival project. And they were familiar with my work, and I had worked in the London Carnival for several years. So upon invitation, I did this for their Tate Live series. And one of my challenges within the Notting Hill Carnival was I was found there was never anybody, or people never spoke about their challenges as West Indians, or that community living within London. So this project kind of talked about that, but it also talked about the riots that happened in 2011 as well. Within the city center, and how youth, disenfranchised youth, are affected within the city of London or across the UK. So the structures they're carrying are like kind of like anti-riot shields. They're actually based off hummingbird patterns. So the procession started on the other side of the Millennium Bridge, came across and made its way into the Turbine Hall. And it took on these formations almost like it was a game of chess being played inside the hall. And that leads me to my current project that I'm working on here at York, I should say, for the city of Toronto. I was invited by the Art Gallery of York University. I was commissioned to do a project for this summer, to do a procession downtown Toronto, which has evolved somewhat over the past 2 years. For the past 2 years, I've been coming to Toronto, and I've been meeting with several groups who I'm now collaborating with. Everyone from dancers with disabilities, capoeira masters, spoken word artists, young fashion designers, the Mississaugas of New Credit, and I'm developing this project called Ring of Fire. The project, as well, in the beginning, started off as part of the Para-Pan Am Games. So it was also this interest in addressing issues around mobility within the context of Carnival, reimagining movement of people with disabilities. My father had a disability, so I thought it would have been, here was an opportunity to do something different, something that I've never done before. So it had to force me now to think about the whole design process and how do you work with persons with disabilities. So for the past 2 years, I've been meeting with Duke Redbird, who is a great speaker, orator, storyteller, who has very much been an inspiration for the project thus far. A huge part of the project is based on the 7 grandfather teachings of the Anishinaabe people. which are wisdom, strength, unity, love, respect, truth, and honesty. And that plays out throughout the procession with large-scale costumes, which represent each of these teachings. And each of these teachings as well is being, poems are being created by spoken word artists who will speak on these teachings within the context of their communities that they come from. And these young people come from Jane and Finch, Malvern, and Regent Park. I'm collaborating with two groups, dancers with disabilities. Here's Equal Grounds, which is a fairly young group. They're all in wheelchairs. The other group is Picasso Pro, which is an integrated dance group. So it's everyone from wheelchairs, visually impaired, and a whole other range of disabilities. Workshops have been happening so far and will continue to happen right through the summer. We started at Sketch, which is downtown, and Art Starts, where I've been working with young fashion designers and creating these new works. Yeah, and that's it.